This is Ron Richards, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. Today's guest is a JazzReggae festival pioneer. He's also an attorney, CPA, double Bruin, and Dominoes aficionado. Please welcome Ron Richards to the program. How you doing, Ron?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for inviting me to participate.
Well, I'm excited to have you because, we're both Bruins, and I never started a music festival during my time there. What's the story with this JazzReggae festival, Ron?
I mean, the story with that is when I was at UCLA, I just noticed there was a real lack of exposure to other forms of music. There's a lot of emphasis on mainstream pop music on the campus. You could see a lot of bands, say rock or other types of pop music. And at the time, it just seemed like something that should be going on a college campus, is that people should get exposed to other types of music. And I happen to be somebody who really has enjoyed jazz since a pretty young age, and reggae as well. But in the beginning, it was just something that I thought was missing. And I was sitting at the Playboy Jazz Festival at the Hollywood Bowl and watching jazz there. And it's kind of constraining. You're in a seat. You're sort of just stuck in the sun, sitting there in the seat, and you can't really just stretch out and relax. And the idea with the Jazz Festival was, hey, let's start this music festival that exposes people to this truly American form of music and lets them relax and stretch out and be on the grass and hear just some great music under the sun. And it was open to everyone. The idea was for it to be open to everyone, not just students. And it took about 18 months to get that off the ground. And as you can imagine, starting something out, the university wasn't really as excited about it then. But 30 years later, it's become part of the institution itself. And people obviously have a very different perspective as things are, they happen that way. But in the beginning, it was a pretty tough climb to convince the university to let us have it. And thanks to a great advisor I had on campus at the time, a gentleman named Ken Heller, who helped me, we worked it through the system and were able to fortunately pull it off and have a really successful event that's involved, thousands and thousands of students over the years, and hopefully brought joy to, tens of thousands of people that have attended.
Oh, I love that, because there's a fair amount of divisiveness on college campuses, and that's kind of par for the course, but it's also cool outside of sports to have something that unites, and music is a great way to do that. How did you have such refined taste? Like you mentioned, you're into jazz at a young age. Like when did you get exposed to jazz music?
I think when I was just younger, I had relatives around me that liked jazz music, and I was fortunate. My parents, when they took us places, they exposed my sisters and I to different types of music and different things. And as is the case for different people, you can't always explain why something really moves you. But I think for me, part of the reason that moved me is it's just truly an American form of music. I mean, and it's complex in nature, but the sound is very pleasing, to the ear, and so I just took a liking to it, and then that continued, over time. And then the more I got exposed to it, I had sort of this old-fashioned view of college that's supposed to be a place where you get exposed to lots of different ideas and different things, and it seemed like this is the place where you could do that. So what I did to be able to pull this off, I mean, the big secret behind the whole thing really is I knew I wanted to do this. I ran a jazz coffee house music series in a commission on the campus called Cultural Affairs Commission, and I decided I'd run for that office so that I'd have the ability to put this jazz festival together. And then we added in the second year the reggae component, but it's been a wild ride and met a lot of great people, as a result.
Well, as a Bruin, I'm very proud. You're right up there with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar when it comes to
Thank you.
And Blossom, some of my favorite Bruin alums.
And John Wooden, of course.
Of course, yeah. I don't know if he actually graduated there, but I'll let him
but a
claim it by
UCLA legend
association.
nonetheless. Nonetheless.
I think he classifies as a legend for sure.
Yeah.
So, how many years, Ron, were you a student at UCLA?
Uh, Actual study on the campus, I was a student for 8 years, but even in the 3 years, I went undergraduate for 4 years. I was on the ASUCLA board of directors in between, so I was on campus quite a bit. And then 3 years after I graduated, I came back and I attended the JD MBA program there, which takes another 4 years. So 8 years of actual study time, but I would say my academic sort of time there was closer to about 11 years that I was just actively on the campus.
Well, I hope that earns you a parking spot at Westwood. If nothing
Definitely a
else,
very soft spot, a very fond place in my heart. I'm a huge fan of everything UCLA. I bleed blue and gold.
and where did you grow up, Ron?
I was born and raised in New York and moved out to California with my family for high school, and then continued on to UCLA, like you already mentioned. And so I've been in California ever since.
Cool. And you have a pretty unique background in that received an MBA and a law degree, and you've kind of applied them both in different ways. What do you think has been more practical for you, your law degree or your MBA?
That's a great question, but a really difficult question because they apply in different ways. It might make sense to explain why I did those things, since most people that know me know I don't really generally talk about it that much.
Yeah, why did you do those things, Ron?
I decided to do them because I wanted to be a better business person, and be able to understand what was going on. And it all kind of started as an undergrad. I was econ business major with an emphasis in accounting. And the reason I took an emphasis in accounting was I was hoping to better understand how financial statements work, because I'd always been an entrepreneur from a young age. And I just felt like this is something, if I ever want to be successful in business and be able to not be misled by people, I need to be able to speak the language of business. And for me, I can't speak for everybody. I felt like I learned a lot in that program at UCLA, but the reason I made the decision to go pursue my CPA after school was because I still felt like I wasn't fluent in accounting. So if you think of accounting like a language, I just felt like I wasn't fluent in that language. And I felt, for me personally, the best way to get fluent was go through a rigorous training program while I was working, get my CPA and leave. And I ended up joining Touche Ross, which was one of the big 8 firms at the time. And during my time there, we merged with Deloitte and became the Deloitte of today. It was a great experience. I learned a lot, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people I met. I was very fortunate. I met a lot of great people and learned a lot from them. But I realized while I was there that this wasn't really what I wanted to do, that I wanted to do deals, not study accounting. And this is not throwing shade on anyone who likes accounting, but that wasn't why I went there. I got to the point where I felt I was fluent in accounting and I achieved my objective. And then it was time to move on. And I decided that I wanted to expand that knowledge base by getting my MBA and my law degree. Again, being able to become more fluent in the language that's used. And when I was an auditor for Deloitte, I recognized that there were just things I didn't quite understand yet that people were talking about on deals. I needed to understand how to talk to lawyers, how to talk to other business people, how to talk to senior management.
Yeah.
So it seemed like a great way to get that additional knowledge. And so I went back, and the JD MBA program lets you save a year. It would take 5 years total to do it if you did one after the other, but if you do them at the same time, you get a little bit of joint credit, and so you graduate a year sooner. So I decided to pursue that approach, a little bit more rigorous, but for me it was the right choice, and I was able to very fortunately go back and do that at UCLA.
Well, that's smart. So, listeners out there, Ron can detect BS in legal contracts and financial statements.
Exactly.
So, very valuable skills. Like I was also a busy econ major, but I did not do the accounting specialization. I took some accounting classes, and I realized pretty early on I didn't know accounting well at all. Like it could have been like Mandarin. Like it was so foreign. Now that it's been a few months since I've graduated. A couple decades, but I think I have a much better handle on it just because, working in industries, managing my own finances, making a lot of mistakes. For people out there, Ron, who are maybe looking at a company, or just someone sends them financial statements, like what are some go-tos? Like what would you suggest? Like look at this if you want to get a better handle on the company without going deep in the weeds.
I would just say at a high level, if it's I'll bifurcate the answer into two things. If it's a startup company, it's going to be different than an established company. So if it's a startup company, I mean, number one thing you're going to look at is really it's the management of the company, the founder, and how do you feel about those people? Do you trust them? Do you believe in their vision? There's not really a lot of hard numbers to look at yet, and anybody can put together financial statements that look great. And in fact, I'd be shocked if someone who's starting something doesn't believe it's going to look great. Otherwise, why would they start it? So let's set that to the side for a moment, because people often ask me about that, and they're really, I mean, you're talking about at that point something that it's just somebody's guess, and so it's not really going to help you that much. If it was an established business, I mean, cash is king. So the number one thing I would try to understand is what's going on with cash in this company and all the things that can be turned into cash. So I would say, focus initially on what is the cash position of the company, and how does the company generate money? How do they collect that money? What's been their experience on collecting that money? I would also focus on sales, understanding like what is the product the company sells, or the service, or whatever it is they sell. How do they get their revenues? What does their revenue model look like? And do you believe in that revenue model? What kind of growth does it generate from year to year? Depending upon what your objective is in the investment, are you looking for something that's stable, that's going to throw off cash, or are you looking for equity appreciation? If you're looking for equity appreciation, then you want to focus on the growth of the company, that sort of thing. And then lastly, I mean, you also want to understand, where is the company right now in terms of its solvency? I mean, what are its obligations versus its assets? Not just debt, but what does it owe its trade creditors? What other obligations does it have out there? What kind of agreements can you sort of suss out from their financials? So, for example, if your financial statement has a large rent payment, then the very next thing to understand is what are the terms of this rent? And is it stable? Does it go up? Percentage based? Is it flat? And look for the largest numbers on there. I mean, this is sort of what an auditor would do. Look for the things that are really material. So what are the things that really make the numbers move? What are the biggest expense items? What are the biggest components of revenue? Because those large items are going to be 80% of what moves the number. It's not going to make a difference if they spend twice as much on postage if they only spend $100 on postage. And you don't waste your time on that. It doesn't matter. Spend your time understanding like how many people work here. What's the average salary of a person who works here? I mean, does it really make sense? Are your costs aligned with your revenue? So those are the things that I would probably focus on.
Nice. So we met, probably about 15 years ago. We were both.
It's a long time.
I know. We were each 7 years old.
Exactly.
And involved in private placements. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were working with a company that was making a blood product. I want to say maybe in Africa. And I remember one of the reasons, there's many reasons to like you, Ron, but you were so passionate about this. And I kind of forgot what happened, but can you share with our audience
what your memory is great. Your memory is exactly right. I was very fortunate that I've had some successes in business, and I wanted to do something that was meaningful with my life. Not that it wasn't meaningful before that, but I wanted to do something that could really make a difference. And I had the opportunity to I met through my work in investment banking, a company that was making artificial blood out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they approached me about leaving investment banking and become the CFO of that company. It was a publicly traded company, maybe a couple $100 million market cap, maybe even a little less than that. But had good bones, good CEO. Was a guy was the one of the most senior people at Procter & Gamble, had left that to go do this, and it looked really, really interesting. And if you do a little research about the history of blood substitutes, I mean, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, people have been trying to find substitutes for blood, and it was very compelling. So I told my wife, hey, I just feel like I have to do this because this might change change humanity. And so I need to be a part of it. And so that's what led me to decide to leave investment banking and literally move from California, where I was happy, to Boston and work on this project to try to bring artificial blood to the world. And your memory is great because we actually had approval in South Africa and was being used there. And just so people who are listeners understand, South Africa was chosen not because it was an easy place to get the drug approved or something. It's actually quite difficult, but because they have in Johannesburg and certain other areas a very high rate of blood-related trauma due to violence. And so it's a good place to have artificial blood, and it was approved there. We were never able, probably the source of a whole, could be something for a whole other podcast, but in short, we weren't able, despite significant efforts, to get it across the finish line in the United States. And like I said, it's beyond the scope of this particular podcast. But the reasons behind it, going back to what you asked, were pure, in that I wanted to do something that would really make a difference in the world, which ends up being a theme of a number of things I did following that too. It's just been a theme for the last 20 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we all wish that worked out. I mean, it's very commendable to kind of leave a stable situation in hopes of doing something that, changes the world. But one of the things I like about you, Ron, is like, we've had lots of conversations through the years. Some are good, some are not so good, like in terms of what's happening, but
right.
You bounce back well. So
Thank you.
I guess, what contributes to your resiliency? Like, what lessons have you learned that allows you to keep moving on?
I think in terms of what I could probably share with listeners of your podcast, that's probably the most helpful is, once you've gone through, life goes in cycles and things just naturally go up and down and up and down. And in the beginning of your life, you haven't had very many cycles. And so you have something terrible happen that destroys that dream you have, or wipes out some gain that you've made, or whatever way you want to look at it. And it's devastating. At least I think it is for me, and I think it is for most people. And you think there's no way you're going to be able to come out the other side of this. It's just ruined everything, and you just can't see how you're going to come out. But then when you finally do get through it and come out the other side, you've seen a complete cycle. And then once you've seen that complete cycle, the next time you come on the next cycle like that, and you're at the front end of it and something happens, you sort of know in the back of your head, it's going to turn out okay. You're going to come out okay. You can't predict how long it's going to take, or how that particular cycle might have a different amplitude or a different length to it. But, it is a cycle, and it's going to come out the other side at some point. So what I've learned, and the reason I could be resilient, is I get depressed like anybody else, about when things don't work well, but I try to start focusing on, after that initial period of grief. And I'll also say to the listeners that, it's like grief for losing anything in life, like losing someone you're close to, losing a pet, losing something that's a project that you're pretty excited about, can be devastating if you've put everything into it. But if you don't put everything into it, on the flip side is, then you're not going to find out what you're really capable of. So, you have to keep doing that, and you have to remind yourself. So you have this down cycle, allow yourself to have the down cycle, but then look for the next thing that might be a great thing to take its place. Once you find that thing, then start focusing on that. And that sort of helps you to start a new cycle. So as the other cycle is ending, the new cycle is beginning, and then you can focus on that new opportunity and try to get your energy really focused on that, instead of focusing on what you've lost. Focus on looking forward on what you have to gain.
Yeah, I like that. Everything's temporary, and
Right.
When you've kind of been knocked down and gotten up before, it's not so daunting. But speaking of new opportunities, gosh, almost 10 years ago, I was convinced that the next green wave was going to be in legal cannabis. I was kind of late in the game when it came to like the .com boom. Shows how brilliant I am. But in some ways I still do. But I just figured, like, seeing hundreds of deals when I was younger, I always was curious about, is there a demand for this? Is there a market? When cannabis legalization kind of came out of the woodwork, I was like, well, I'm not worried that there's a demand or a market. But you were one of the first people, and in many ways a role model, because you were an advocate for legalization at a time when, like, now it's not a very big deal, at least in my opinion. Like, people can say I'm pro cannabis legalization. It's like, okay, cool. What do you want for lunch? When did you come out, so to speak, in terms of being a proponent for legality, and what were some of the kind of early reactions you got from clients and colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a little bit about that. It's my history with it was very personal in that I could see what the plant was capable of doing from some people that I knew who were sick, and I happen, as a side hobby, that we don't have to take the whole conversation here today, is I happen to be an artisan bread baker and a chef, and I saw what was going on with these patients, and this is many years even before legalization, and that they were forced to either smoke or have things that really didn't taste very good. And I thought I could help these patients. I could make something that actually tastes good. This can't be that difficult. I'll figure out how to extract the material and make some baked goods that taste good. It was for two friends of mine that happen to have pancreatic cancer. And so I helped. I made them baked goods that tasted quite good, that were made with cannabis, and I learned about that, and I decided, wow, this is really interesting, watching what's happened with them. And they both didn't have very good prognosis, but it eased their pain while they were going through this process. And I thought that was important. And then, coming from the biotech background, this is following my departure from BioPure, the artificial blood company. I just thought, well, here's this plant. I'd had a lot of exposure to biotech and life science companies over my banking time and my time in the industry. And the drug industry is always looking, the pharma industry is always looking for new compounds, and the cannabis plant has hundreds of compounds in it. I mean, there's over 100 cannabinoids alone, and then there's terpenes and flavonoids and thiols and all sorts of things that are present in the plant. I thought, wow, this is just a really rich source of potential new drug therapies that could really help people. We already know it helps people. We don't completely understand why it helps people for a lot of things, but we can see the impact of, and a lot of drugs are like that. We don't know exactly why they work. They just work. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I think it's important. This plant is not really getting the attention it deserves to be able to be a source of potential remedies for people. And so that's when I started looking into getting involved. And based upon my legal background, I decided that I wanted to be involved at a point where it was at least legal at the state level, so that I could get a license from the state, and that even if it was still federally illegal, the state would be behind me if I was within the constructs of the state law. And so that's how we decided to proceed. And we formed our company in California in light of that, just before legalization was about to occur, so that we could then move straight from the collective days into the new adult and medical legalization age. And that's kind of how we got started and why we got started. And in fact, it's sort of ties back to the theme we were talking about earlier in the podcast. It was actually my third attempt to do something really to change humanity. There was another one in between there, which is totally separate, but this was one where I really felt it could happen. And going to your point about like starting out, like what was it like, or what was I thinking? The risk was, it was still federally legal. I mean, you can go to federal prison for doing it, and at that time they were still enforcing federal laws. And I sat down with my wife, who's very supportive of the things I want to do, and said, listen, I think I'm doing this right, so that's not going to be a problem, but there's a potential I can go to federal prison for this. But I think it's really important, and if people like me don't get involved, then this is never going to change. So I have to get involved if we want to see this kind of medicine ever be made available to people. And that was the decision point for me, is I decided I'm doing this in the most legal way I think I possibly can. And knock on wood, it turned out okay, but I understood at the time that there was a chance that it might not. But I felt that I was well thought out. My decision-making process was solid. And that if it came down to something, I thought my odds were pretty good that if the federal government had gone after me at the beginning, that I could justify this, saying I got a license from the state of California, to do this. I don't think that I should be prosecuted for this, but I knew there was still a risk, and I was willing to take that risk.
Well, you took the risk and you've stayed out of jail, so congratulations. Now you have a new passion that is not cannabis related, although maybe some could combine the two. But Dominoes, can you share with, like, this is a pretty recent thing? Like, how'd you get so involved in Dominoes?
Towards the end of COVID, I met a group of people that were just hanging out together. As everyone remembers, during COVID, people were trying to find their little pods of people they could hang out with and be able to do things. And I ended up hanging out with a group of people that played dominoes together. I got invited to go basically. The way my friend put it is, my friend has put together the ultimate man cave. Let's go visit and have a beer, and then come back, and everybody's cool. And I went there, and they said, do you play dominoes? And I said, no. I mean, when I was a kid, I played something with dominoes, but I wouldn't call myself a serious player.
Did you stack them up and knock them down?
Right, knock them down or play something with my sisters. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm sure I played something. And they said, "Oh, do you want to play?" And I had said, "No, I'm just going to watch because I don't really know the rules of the game, and I don't want to get in the way of everyone having a good time. So I'll just sit behind someone here and I'll just sort of watch the game." And for me, watching that game played in front of me was like watching a symphony or a ballet, like the way the dominoes relate to each other and how there's a lot of mathematical relationships and patterns that form in terms of when you're scoring the dominoes and playing the game. It really captured my imagination. And I didn't play that first day at all, but I watched them. We all ended up hanging out for about 4 to 6 hours together. And I watched the game, and I just thought, wow, this game's really fascinating. I want to learn more about it. And I got home and told my wife, hey, I got exposed to this game. It's amazing. And then I just started diving deep into it, as you might have picked up from things I've done before. And I started learning more and more about it, and just got more and more intrigued with it, with understanding the game, and also just overlapping with my approach to business and life, which is having a solid decision-making process. And the game is like that. There's strategy, logic, probability, there's bluffing, there's offensive play, defensive play. So I just started saying, wow, I played poker previously for a number of years, but dominoes just had this way of capturing my imagination, everything from the tiles themselves to the way they interact with each other and the way the people have fun playing. It just was really captivating to me, I guess is the best way to say it. And so I decided I would try to understand that better, and started working on a book on advanced domino strategy for how to make decisions at the edge, where decisions are difficult. In the game, you're often faced with difficult decisions that you have to make. And how do you apply a modern decision-making process to a game that's it's not thousands of years old? Like, how do you apply a decision-making process so that you make the best decisions based upon probability, logic, game theory, all sorts of things combined into one? And then I'm not expecting it to be a bestseller, but for people that love the game, there's a lot of interest. And I've been very fortunate over the course of the last 8 or 9 months, as I've been starting to pull this together. I've made a number of discoveries of things of how the dominoes relate to each other that haven't been published on yet. And those things will be included in my book to explain why certain things happen in the game. Like, a lot of times people will have a rule, they'll just understand, oh, you should do this, but they don't necessarily understand the math behind why that pattern repeats itself. And I'm trying to do something different than has been written before, and hopefully it'll all come together and the book will get finished.
Well, I mean, there's so many books on poker or blackjack. Like, I mean, this could end up being the authority on dominoes. But I guess I'm curious, Ron, like, you went from not really understanding what the game was to now authoring a technical book on dominoes. Like, I guess, what caused that? Like, when did you realize, okay, this isn't just some kind of cursory fascination? Like, I'm going full geek on this. Like, what did you have a moment, or was it just like all of a sudden here we are?
Anybody in your podcast that has felt what I'm going to describe will understand exactly what I'm talking about if they've played dominoes or something else. But there are people that just play dominoes very casually. They can sit down and they're not trying to really fully understand the game. Just like with any game, there's people that sit down and mess around with chess or do whatever. But the people who really get into dominoes, there's a subset of people that are super passionate about the game, and there's something about the game when you get into that level. So to teach you the game, Matt, I can teach you the game in 15 minutes. Like, it's not very difficult. The rules aren't complex to understand. I can teach you the game, and you can sit down and you can play the game. But if you are I find it's about 20% of the people that I've taught to play the game that catches the bug of the game, that really, really gets into it. The game is a game that takes 15 minutes to learn, but a lifetime to master. There's just layer after layer of the game. And the more you start to understand that and play with people, so at a high level, to maybe convince some people who are listening to this to want to maybe look into this game a little more, is at a very high level, you'll hear people say, oh, the game's just luck. It's just luck. It's random. Like, you get these dominoes, and if you get these dominoes, you win. If you don't get your dominoes, you lose. And that's the way it is. But that's actually not true. The game's a game of skill, and it has an element of luck. All games that are good have some element of luck to them. If there was no element of randomness or luck, then you would just master the game and be done, and it would be finished. It'd be like solving a jigsaw puzzle. Once you put all the pieces in, you're finished, and that interest in that, you're done. These types of games are not really like that. Every single game is different, and so every time you play the game, you're learning something different. You're starting to learn about patterns and underlying rules about why things go a certain way. And the game is deterministic, meaning that it's random what dominoes you select, but then what dominoes you play from the point that they first start playing determine what happens next as you go through the multiple hands of the game. So your decisions determine much of the outcome, and a different decision in the beginning will result in a very different decision at the end. What's kind of ironic about it is it's not unlike setting up your dominoes and toppling them over, is depending upon which domino you choose to topple over will affect which dominoes fall after that. And that's sort of funny, because that's the way the game is. Even when you're not toppling the dominoes, it's the same thing. Is what you choose impacts what the other person can play and what their strategy is going to be. And so you start to learn more and more about that. What I've learned when I've been putting my book together, and the best analogy I can use for this probably is maybe driving a car or playing a guitar, something like that, is that you don't need to know how the engine of your car works to be able to drive your car. You can drive your car and not understand at all how it works, just that you push the button and start your car and drive down the street. You might want to know some things about how the car works, but you don't have to know that. And when you learn how to drive your car, in the beginning, it's just difficult to just drive. But once you've learned how to sort of drive your car around, you can add on extra things that you can do. It's the same thing with this, is that once there's sort of, I like to think of it like a Venn diagram. There's understanding everything that's going on, and there's playing this game, and there's an overlap where understanding how it works might help you with your game. But some of the things are just going to be interested, as you said, into people who are geeking out and want to understand, like, mathematically, why does this work? But it may not really improve their game. So there's going to be an element of both. Like, why does it work this way? But take from it what you will, and then incorporate the elements that make sense to you into your game. That's sort of, and then also just giving you a framework to be able to make your decisions in the game. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. And like I said, it's not necessarily a mass market book, but it will hopefully be the foundation of some other things that I'm trying to do. Like, I'm trying to start a Dominoes charitable organization, because it's good for teaching kids math and strategy. It's good for senior citizens for staving off dementia and memory. So there's a whole lot of things going on. And when I realized that, that's what made me, going back to your original question, all those things combined have made me super passionate about what Dominoes can do. And above all else, they create community. I mean, where you go to communities where people play, people have a great time and get to know each other, and it bridges a lot of barriers.
It's like jazz and reggae and cannabis. Exactly. It brings people together. Well, it will definitely be the first book on Dominoes I'll purchase. I guarantee that.
Thank you.
Well, we're wrapping up, and we'll definitely want to have you back in the future. But I like to ask guests this. When it comes to your professional life, Ron, what are you most proud of?
That's a great question. I mean, I would just say probably it's not a specific thing. For me, it'd be my integrity. I think I've developed a reputation over the course of my lifetime of doing deals that I've always had the highest integrity as a person, and how I treat other people in terms of who I am, as a person, what I'm about, what I'm trying to build. And so if I had to pick that one thing, I would say that's the thing that I'm the most proud of, and the thing that I protect the most and cherish the most, and just would not sacrifice.
Stand on integrity. And looking forward, Ron, what are you most optimistic about?
In terms of life or business, or
either one, yeah, however you want to answer it.
I mean, I think for me, what I'm most optimistic about is the resiliency of people. I mean, there's just all sorts of problems that are happening in the world, and if you're not going to hope for some resiliency, then you can get depressed every day and figure that this is never going to change. But I mean, I'm hopeful that, that some of these things that are happening in the world, and not to make this a political discussion on either side of what's going on, that we could just see the country come back, towards the middle and more civility towards people. And I'd like to believe that. So I'd say optimistically, I'm optimistic that people are starting to recognize that, and that there has to be compromise, in the world, and that's the only way things are going to get done. It can't be scorched earth for everything on either side.
This might be controversial, but I'm also pro civility, Ron. I think I'll come out.
You and me, we're going to start a movement.
We'll fight for civility in a reasonable, moderate manner, of course. Well, Ron Richards, thank you so much for joining us on the Matt Balaker podcast. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.